What moods can you manifest with a little cartoon bouncing ball? What emotions can you evoke? I think a lot. Today we're going to see if I can animate a bouncing ball in 5 different feelings. And first up is the first step here is setting the scene. I had a few ideas, but I went with this gloomy park kind of setting with a bench and sidewalk. Almost going horror, but hopefully avoiding it. This is also just a placeholder because I'll draw the full background in Photoshop. For the animation, I want a semi-realistic bounce that'll end with it slowly rolling off screen. Just giving those harsh reality vibes. I made it a volleyball because I was thinking about Castaway, and also a dull white seemed appropriate for the scene. Then a little bit of squash and stretch, but not so much that it becomes too cartoony. Now, another big thing that'll really set the mood is rain. The method I use for that is basically draw one drop, animate that moving down, and place a bunch of those all over the place. To make the pavement look wet, I also had a reflection of the ball, which is just the ball animation flipped upside down. Then you play with the opacity and blur. The other thing is making tiny splashes on the ground. So I animated one of those, then placed them sporadically with different sizes and timing. Now for the real background. I essentially just drew a better looking, more detailed and painterly version of what I had in Photoshop. I also added some shrubs and subtle environmental reflections in the pavement. One last thing I needed to add was a splash when the ball hits the ground. I made a simple animation and reused that, slightly smaller and more transparent for each subsequent hit. And that's the animation done. I didn't document the next part, but it's a crucial element. Sound. The main components are ball bounces, rain, and music. And with that, I present my sad ball bounce. Well, isn't that sad? Well, I think we better move on to the next emotion, and that is... Yes, we are doing the opposite now, and I thought the ball should be super bouncy like one of these things. So I made this sequence of tall arcs that only get a little bit smaller each time, and animated the ball along that path. The squash and stretch is also more exaggerated to help with the whimsical feeling. The background is similar to last time, but it's going to be sunny with a bit of a playground in the back. I also gave the ball a smiley face and made it yellow, so it's pretty much the symbol for happiness. After getting the timing of the bounces just right, I went to animate the shading on the ball. But it was too much of a hassle and didn't really add much, so I stopped. Then I added these subtle lighting effects on the ball when it passes the sun. I thought a shadow on the ground was worth doing though, so I made that by moving an oval underneath the ball and changing the opacity and blur with the height. Now it's time to make the background in Photoshop. Same situation, but I'm putting in a nice tree and a red slide. Also going to add some clouds, which aren't exactly associated with happiness, but they're happy clouds, and some hills way in the back to fill it out. With the new background in place, I copied the ball animation, made it pink, and delayed it so we have 2 little smiley faces just bouncing along. The final touch was bringing it into Premiere Pro and adding a lens flare. I moved it around slightly and had it blink when each ball passes in front of the sun. Now for sound. For the bounces I used a cartoony boing sound, then I slapped on some cheery music and ambient bird noises. And here is my happy ball bounce animation. Well, there you go. Very chipper animation if you ask me. Bordering on silly, which could be a thing of its own, but task completed I would say. So let's head on to number 3, which is... My idea for this was to have a ball slowly bounce into a bedroom from the dark. So I started making this placeholder background with a door on the right and a window on the left letting in some moonlight. The view was from the bed, so I put the end of that in the foreground. The animation process is more of the same, with a circle animated along these curved paths. This time there are 6 bounces and a medium to low height, which I thought was just fitting for the mood. After that it rolls slowly and bounces off the wall before coming to a stop. I made the ball a dark red, but with the lighting it's mostly black. Then it was a lot of figuring out the timing and spacing and lighting. For the background, I more or less recreated what I had in Photoshop and made the door more 3D. I shaded all the surfaces in a slightly grungy way and did the same for the bed. Adding a dark blue layer with a multiply blending mode really set the tone. That was underneath the bed, which helped separate it. The bed also needed to be its own layer in the animation because the ball goes partially behind it. Now, so it isn't just an empty room, I'll draw these drawers. I think it's also called a dresser. I also drew skirting on the edges of the wall, a light bulb, and of course some curtains on the window. Back to Adobe Animate, where I'll animate some rain outside the window. A dark and rainy night seems to be the recipe for both sadness and fear. To add to the spookiness and have the animation loop, I had a lightning strike that'll light up the room and have the ball vanish at the same time. I made a brighter version of the background in Photoshop and did some post-production to make that work. In Premiere Pro, I added all the sound effects and music, which play a very big role in this one. I also used this VHS overlay and added a bit of chromatic aberration and a vignette. So after all that, here's my scary ball bounce animation. Well, I hope you either enjoyed that or shivered in your timbers. I think it turned out pretty good. Pretty unsettling. The children's laughter is always terrifying. So that was fun. Let's move on to number 4, which is... I started this angry ball bounce by making an empty room with grey walls and an opening up the top left. The plan is to have this black ball come zooming in from there and bounce all over the place before flying back out. I used a motion guide again, but that turned out to be unnecessary because all of the animation was in straight lines. It was going fast enough that you didn't need any curves. It was still useful for planning out where it was going though. Since it wasn't really slowing down at any point, it was stretched the whole time and squashed dramatically when it hit the surfaces. Now, to make you feel the impact, I had the screen flash red on each hit. Then I made some different impact animations. I also added a camera shake on most of the hits to really drive it home. For the background, I had a solid grey and drew a couple layers of angry scribbles. Then a few angry, scribbly faces on top of that. It was a lot of experimenting with brushes, and I eventually added in some red on the sides. Now, to finish off the animation, I adjusted the flashing and camera shake. Then, of course, it was time for music and sound, which boils down to loud impacts and metalcore. So here's an angry ball bounce. Not bad. I didn't spend as long on this one because, well, I spent way too long in the first 3, but I still think this is quite effective. I'm happy with how it turned out, but yeah, let's move on to animation number 5, which is, of course... I figured it was best to unwind after scary and angry with something chill. I'm setting up a beach dune here with the ocean downhill in the distance. This time it's going to be a beach ball. It'll need big slow bounces for that chill vibe, so I drew these 3 arcs for the motion guide. Before animating it, I drew the ball, which was just this typical white with multicolored strips. Now, a little bit of squash and stretch. It doesn't make a lot of sense to do that because it's so light and solid, but it makes it more interesting. I also had it rotate as it went. For shading, I put this gradient around the edges and then got to work on the highlights. I animated a white line and dot frame by frame around the top right of the ball, which is a little scuffed and tedious, but it works. Now I'll put a shadow under the ball and behind it a little bit, adjusting the blur and opacity as needed. I started on the background but got most of the way through it before I realized I was recording the wrong app. But once I finished that, I went back to Adobe Animate for some shimmer on the water. I made a 3-frame loop of a bunch of white dots jiggling around, then added a glow and overlaid it. After all of that, I added some beach ball and ocean and bird sound effects and called it done. So that's my chill little animation. Not overly complex, which is kind of perfect for the theme. Just a nice, simple, picturesque ball bounce. I also thought it was pretty chill to just have no music. And there you have it. 5 different feelings evoked through 5 different bouncing balls. That was good, I think. I'll probably do more of these in the future if this video doesn't flop. But if it does become a series, maybe I'll try going more complex or abstracts with the emotions. So I hope you enjoyed this video, have a nice week, and I will see you next time.